My name is Indy Fairbanks Webb, and at 34 years old, I've come to realize that in the high-stakes theater of American social climbing, family isn't a sanctuary, it's a brand. And 4 years ago, on the humid eve of Mother's Day in Virginia, I was officially rebranded as a liability. I discovered I'd been erased from my own family, removed from our WhatsApp group like a stranger, like someone who never belonged in the curated gallery of my mother's life. My mother's message to my siblings was crystal clear, shimmering on the screen with the cold efficiency of a corporate termination letter. All my children are successful except Indy. She chose to be a lowly teacher. I no longer see her as my daughter. I didn't scream. I didn't call her crying to beg for a seat at a table that was already full of ego. I simply disappeared the way she wanted me to. What my mother didn't know was that 4 years later, I'd be standing on a stage in front of 500 people with the governor of Virginia shaking my hand, and she'd be sitting in the audience, uninvited, waiting for a moment in the spotlight that would never come. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly speaks to you. Where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Let me start from the beginning. The night I realized I'd lost the family I thought I had and began building the one I actually deserved. Growing up, the Fairbanks family was what people in our manicured Virginia suburb called picture perfect. We were the local aristocracy of the suburban dream. My mother, Eleanor Fairbanks, retired from her position as a regional bank manager at 55, not because she needed rest, but because she'd finally secured her seat at the Westbrook Country Club, a fortress of old stone and polo shirts where the grass is cut to the millimeter and the secrets are buried even deeper. The membership alone cost more than my annual salary as an educator. She wore her vintage silk scarves like a knight wears a crest, always draped just so over her shoulders, always in muted taupes and eggshells that whispered, "Old money," even though our money was barely a generation old. My sister Sloane was the crown jewel. Now 38, a plastic surgeon in Richmond with a clientele that included local news anchors and politicians' wives. She lived in a world of clinical perfection and high-definition vanity. She posted photos of her Rolex Datejust casually resting on Carrera marble restaurant tables, her perfectly manicured nails wrapped around champagne flutes at black tie charity galas. Every Thanksgiving, she'd update us on her latest subtle work, as if we couldn't see the tightening around her eyes, the lips that seemed fuller each year, the slow transformation into a porcelain version of herself. Then there was Preston, 40 years old, a shark-eyed corporate lawyer in D.C. He drove a matte black Mercedes G-Wagon that he made sure to park in the most visible spot at every family gathering, a four-wheeled monument to his billing hours. He had a wife named Carolyn who collected designer handbags the way some people collect stamps, methodically, obsessively, always hunting for the next limited edition Birkin to signal her rank. And then there was me, Indy, the youngest, the one who didn't quite fit the family portfolio. I was a fourth-grade teacher at Maple Creek Elementary, a small school tucked into the rolling farmland about 90 miles from my mother's pristine colonial revival estate. My Honda Civic was 12 years old and rattled when the Virginia winter hit 40 degrees. My apartment could fit inside Sloane's walk-in closet. But here's what no one ever mentioned at those country club brunches. My mother had two successful children, a doctor and a lawyer. Not three. Never. I didn't choose teaching because I couldn't do anything else. When I graduated high school, I had a 4.1 GPA and a full scholarship offer to pursue pre-med at UVA, the same path Sloan had taken a decade before. My mother had already ordered the future doctor bumper sticker for her car. She'd told all her friends at the club. The narrative was set. But I'd spent that summer volunteering at a literacy camp for underprivileged kids in our county. There was this boy, Marcus Jr., 8 years old, couldn't read past a first grade level, had been told his whole life he was slow. In the sweltering August heat of that community center, he started devouring chapter books. The day he finished Charlotte's Web on his own, he hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. That was the moment I knew. I felt a spark that no surgical suite or law office could ever ignite. I called my mother that night to tell her I was declining the pre-med scholarship. I was going to study education instead. I wanted to teach elementary school. The silence on the other end lasted 17 seconds. I counted every hollow heartbeat. "You're throwing your life away," she finally said. "For what? A government salary and ungrateful children?" She didn't come to my college graduation. Said she had a conflict, a garden party at the club that same weekend. Sloan sent a card with a check for $50 and a note that read, "Good luck with your little career." I cased the check. I needed groceries, but I never forgot the message beneath those words. You chose wrong. You chose less, and we will never let you forget it. I didn't choose to be poor. I chose meaning. To my mother, those two things were exactly the same. In the Fairbanks Bible, purpose without a six-figure price tag was a sin. The exclusion didn't happen all at once. It crept in slowly, like ivy strangling an old brick wall. Thanksgiving 2019. I arrived at my mother's house with a homemade sweet potato casserole, her favorite recipe, the one Grandma Ruth used to make. When I walked into the dining room, I found my place card at the small folding table in the corner, the one set up for Sloane's stepchildren and Preston's toddler nephew. "Oh, honey, we just ran out of room at the main table," my mother said, adjusting her pearl earrings with a practiced, airy dismissiveness. "You don't mind, do you? You're so good with children." I was 30 years old, a professional with a degree, being relegated to the plastic chairs and juice boxes. Christmas that year was worse. I'd spent 3 weeks knitting my mother a cashmere scarf in her favorite shade of dove gray. When she opened it, she held it up, smiled thinly, and said, "How handmade." Then she turned to Sloan, who had gifted her a Chanel clutch and spent the next 20 minutes raving about the stitching, the hardware, the craftsmanship. My scarf ended up in the coat closet. I found it there 2 months later, still in the tissue paper, tags I'd carefully removed, stuffed back inside. But the final blow came on her birthday in early 2020. I called to ask what time dinner was. "Oh, Indy," she said, her voice dripping with practiced regret. "The restaurant only had 6 seats available. Your father, Preston and Carolyn, Sloan, and her date. You understand, don't you? Family comes first." 6 seats. And somehow I wasn't family enough to fill one of them. I was a footnote in a chapter they were trying to edit out. But all of that, the folding table, the forgotten scarf, the restaurant that didn't have room, None of it prepared me for what came next. The only person in my family who still treated me like I existed was my cousin Riley. She was 24 then, my Aunt Patricia's daughter, 8 years younger than me, fresh out of college and working her first marketing job in Charlottesville. We'd been close since she was a kid. I used to babysit her on weekends, take her to the library, help her with homework when her own parents were too busy fighting. Riley was the kind of person who noticed when you were hurting, even when you tried to hide it behind a polite smile. The night before Mother's Day 2020, my phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Riley's name lit up the screen, a blue beacon in my dark bedroom. When I answered, her voice was shaking. "Indy, I need to tell you something. I didn't know if I should, but you deserve to know." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "Check your WhatsApp, the family group." I opened the app, scrolled to Fairbanks Family Dinner, the group my mother had created 3 years ago to coordinate holidays. I wasn't in it anymore. "Riley, I know they removed you. Your mom asked Sloan to do it last week, but she only got around to it tonight." Riley's voice cracked. "Indy, I'm so sorry. I screenshotted everything. I'm sending it to you now." My phone buzzed. One image, then another. I stared at the screen at my mother's words frozen in digital ink. And something inside me went very, very quiet. "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. "Because you're my family," Riley said. "Even if they've decided you're not theirs." I saved those screenshots in a folder I titled Proof. I didn't know then that I'd need them. I just knew I couldn't let those words disappear. I read that screenshot 47 times that night. Not because I didn't understand the words. I understood them perfectly. I read them over and over because some part of me kept searching for a loophole, a phrase that might mean something different, a context that could soften the blow. There wasn't one. The message was from my mother, posted in the family group at 8:32 p.m. Reminder: Mother's Day dinner at the Jefferson Hotel, 7 p.m. sharp. All my children will be there. All my successful children. Indy chose to be a lowly teacher. I no longer see her as my daughter. Please don't mention her name tomorrow. Below it, Sloan had replied with a heart emoji. Just a heart. No protest, no hesitation. Preston's response: "Understood, Mom." 2 words. That's all I was worth to my brother. 2 words and total compliance. I sat on the edge of my bed in my tiny studio apartment, phone clutched in my hands. And I didn't cry. I wanted to, God. I wanted to fall apart, to scream into a pillow, to call my mother and demand an explanation. But what would that change? She'd made her decision. She'd announced it to the family like a press release. Indy is no longer one of us, and everyone had agreed. I stayed awake until 2 a.m., staring at those messages, reading the timestamps, noticing that not a single person, not my father, not my aunt, not anyone, had pushed back. Riley was the only one who'd thought to warn me. By sunrise, I'd made a decision of my own. If my mother wanted me gone, I would be gone completely, on my own terms. But I would not forget, and I would not delete those screenshots. In the world of the Fairbanks, image was everything, but I was holding the negative. Some receipts you keep forever. Mother's Day morning, I woke up to a silence so heavy it felt like physical weight. No calls, no texts, no awkward, "We miss you, wish you could make it," from Sloan. Nothing. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't send my mother flowers from that boutique florist in Alexandria she insisted on. I didn't call to wish her a happy day. I didn't drive 90 miles up the I-95 to sit at a corner table while she pretended I didn't exist. I made myself coffee, strong, black, and devoid of the almond milk foam she always critiqued. I graded papers. I went for a walk along the creek behind my apartment complex and watched the water catch the morning light, listening to the rustle of the Virginia pines instead of the clinking of country club silverware. And I thought about my options. I could call her, confront her, demand to know why she'd said those things, why she'd cut me out, why being a teacher made me unworthy of her love. I could screenshot her message and post it online. I could set fire to her reputation in a single viral post. Let the world see what kind of mother raises a doctor, a lawyer, and a daughter she throws away like a seasonal fashion faux pas. I could show up at the Jefferson uninvited, make a scene, force them to acknowledge my existence amidst the marble columns and the high tea. But what would any of that accomplish? My mother had made her choice. She'd chosen status over her own child. She'd chosen the opinion of women at a country club over the daughter who'd loved her for 3 decades. If she wanted me to disappear, I would give her exactly what she asked for. But not because she demanded it, because I chose it. I took back the power of my own absence. I blocked her number that afternoon, then Sloane's, then Preston's. I deleted Instagram so I wouldn't have to see their curated family photos, their filters hiding the rot beneath the surface. I didn't know then that my silence would last 4 years. I didn't know that those 4 years would change everything. All I knew in that quiet moment was this: I would no longer audition for a role in a family that had already recast me as an extra. The world kept spinning, and the Fairbanks family kept pretending I was never part of it. 6 months after that Mother's Day, Riley called me with an update I hadn't asked for. "Thanksgiving photos are up," she said quietly, her voice echoing the melancholy of a gray November day. "Sloan posted them an hour ago." I told myself I wouldn't look. I lasted 3 hours. The image showed my mother at the head of her formal dining table, flanked by Sloan and Preston, their spouses arranged perfectly behind them. Crystal stemware caught the light. A massive turkey glistened in the center like a trophy. The caption read, "Grateful for my amazing family. Mom, you raised us right." 3 people, not 4. My chair wasn't even empty. They'd simply reconfigured the space with the cold precision of a stage crew, as if the table had always been set for 6 instead of 8. By Christmas, I'd stopped torturing myself with social media, but Riley still called. "Your mom tells everyone you're doing volunteer work in Africa," she said. "She said it's some kind of education nonprofit, very prestigious. Can't come home because you're changing lives overseas." I laughed, the bitter kind that scrapes your throat like dry autumn leaves. She's lying to cover up that she disowned me. She's lying so no one asks questions, so she doesn't have to admit she kicked out her own daughter for being a teacher. She's protecting the brand. Riley paused. Indy, she told Mrs. Patterson at the club that you were nominated for some international teaching award in Kenya. I hadn't left Virginia in 3 years. That's when I understood. My mother didn't hate me. She hated what my existence said about her brand of perfection. So, she'd invented a version of me she could brag about, a humanitarian hero, conveniently unreachable and safely idealistic. The real me, the one who taught 4th grade 90 miles away, I was already a ghost. I met Caleb Webb on a Tuesday in October, surrounded by pumpkins and giggling 9-year-olds. His farm, Webb Family Organics, was a local legend. 50 acres of rolling hills, heritage vegetables, and a small orchard where families came every fall to pick apples and take photos against the weathered red barn. The air smelled of damp earth and ripening Macintosh apples. I'd brought my 4th graders on a field trip to learn about sustainable agriculture. Caleb was waiting by the tractor when our bus pulled up. Tall, broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and soil permanently embedded under his fingernails like a badge of honest work. He shook my hand and said, "You must be Miss Fairbanks. My daughter hasn't stopped talking about you." His daughter was Maeve, 5 years old, with golden curls and a smile that could melt glaciers. She was in my colleague's kindergarten class, but I tutored her twice a week after her mother passed away from cancer the year before. Maeve is an incredible kid, I told him. Smart as a whip, curious about everything. Something shifted in his face. Gratitude, maybe, or the recognition of a kindred spirit who saw beauty in the growth of small things. She says you're her favorite teacher in the whole school, even though you're not technically her teacher. He smiled, a genuine, unpracticed expression that felt like a warm porch light. That field trip turned into a phone call. The phone call turned into coffee at a small diner where the waitresses knew everyone's name. Coffee turned into a picnic under the old oak tree on his property, where Caleb asked about my family, and I told him the truth. I don't have one, I said. Or they decided they don't have me. He didn't ask for details. He didn't push. He just handed me a slice of apple pie that tasted like home and tradition and said, "Family isn't always blood, Indy. Sometimes it's the people who show up when everyone else leaves." That was the moment I started believing him. He wasn't looking for a doctor or a lawyer. He was looking for me. 2 years passed like pages turning in a book I was finally writing for myself. In 2022, Caleb and I got married. Not at a country club, not with 300 guests and a 12-tier cake that tasted like cardboard and vanity. We exchanged vows under the oak tree where we'd had our first real conversation, with Maeve as our flower girl and a handful of friends who'd become family in the ways that truly mattered. I officially adopted Maeve that same year. The day the paperwork came through, she handed me a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. On the bottom, in wobbly kindergarten letters, she'd written, "My mom, my dad, me." I keep that drawing in my desk at work. Some days, when the world feels heavy with the echoes of my mother's voice, I pull it out just to remember what matters. I finished my master's degree in educational leadership through night classes and summer sessions, typing papers at 11 p.m. after Maeve was asleep, studying during my lunch breaks, determined to prove that ambition didn't require abandoning the students I loved. When a position opened up for assistant principal at Maple Creek Elementary, I applied. I wanted to lead with the heart of a teacher, not the ego of an executive. The interview panel consisted of 3 school board members, including Caleb, who recused himself from voting with the integrity that defined him. I got the job anyway. Through all of it, I stayed invisible. No social media, no press releases, no proud announcements to the family that had erased me. Somewhere in Richmond, my mother was still telling people I was saving children in Africa. Somewhere in D.C., Preston was still pretending he'd never had a second sister. Somewhere online, Sloan was posting photos of family dinners at tables that would never have a place for me. They had no idea who I'd become: a wife, a mother, a leader in my community. I wasn't ready to tell them. Not yet. I was building a fortress of peace, and the Fairbanks were not allowed past the gate. The phone call that shifted the trajectory of my life arrived on a crisp, quintessential Virginia Thursday in March 2024. The air outside my office window was filled with the scent of damp earth and the first tentative blooms of cherry blossoms, but inside, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of old floor wax and the hum of fluorescent lights. "Mrs. Fairbanks Webb?" The voice on the other end was formal, precise, and carried the undeniable weight of state-level authority. "This is Diana Morrison from the Virginia Department of Education. The board has concluded its final review of the shortlisted candidates, and I'm honored to inform you that you have been selected as the new superintendent of schools for Clark County." I sat down on the edge of my heavy oak desk, my legs suddenly feeling as uncertain as a first-year teacher on her first day. Superintendent. A title that carried the weight of 1,000 decisions. A position that would place me at the helm of an entire educational ecosystem. The position I'd applied for on a whim. A quiet, private act of defiance against the ceiling everyone else had built for me, was now mine. I would be overseeing 12 schools, 4,000 students, and the multi-million-dollar budget that would make my mother's country club's annual revenue look like a high school bake sale. "Are you certain?" I managed to whisper, my eyes landing on the crayon drawing Maeve had made for me, pinned right next to my official certification. "Your track record speaks for itself, Indy," Diana continued, her voice warming with genuine respect. "Literacy rates in your district are up 18% in 3 years. Your teacher retention is the highest in the entire Shenandoah Valley. The Teacher First mentorship program you pioneered, the one focusing on emotional resilience and classroom autonomy, is being adopted as the gold standard statewide. You've built something remarkable out of pure grit. Dr. Eleanor Hart specifically cited you as the most visionary educator she's seen in a decade." Eleanor Hart, my mentor, the state education commissioner. She had seen the fire in me when I was just a 22-year-old in a cluttered classroom, struggling to reach a group of children the world had already written off. The announcement hit the local papers 2 weeks later. "From the classroom to the cabinet, local educator named superintendent." It was a sharp, professional headline in the Shenandoah Valley Voice, accompanied by a headshot where I finally looked like the woman I had become. Steady, experienced, and no longer looking for permission to exist. I didn't think anyone in the Fairbanks family would see it. They lived in a vacuum of Richmond high society and D.C. corporate law firms. They didn't waste their time with small-town news or rural educational journals. I was wrong. In the age of digital footprints and Google alerts, success has a way of haunting the people who tried to bury you. Riley called that evening, her voice breathless, vibrating with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Indy! Oh my God! Sloan just posted that article in the family group chat. Her only caption was, "Isn't this our Indy?" My stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. What did my mother say? Nothing. She hasn't replied to the chat yet. Riley hesitated, the sound of her shifting in her chair audible over the line. But I was at Aunt Patricia's when the news broke. Your mom called Sloan immediately. I could hear her through the heavy mahogany doors. She was screaming. Indy, she wasn't proud. She was humiliated. Furious that she didn't know. Furious that her elaborate lie about you being a humanitarian hero in Africa just imploded in front of the people she's been gaslighting for years. The email arrived 3 days later. The subject line was a masterclass in the Fairbanks brand of passive aggression. From the desk of Eleanor Fairbanks. I sat in the farmhouse kitchen, the blue light of my laptop screen the only illumination, and I almost deleted it unread. Almost. My dearest Indy, it began, shamelessly reclaiming the nickname she'd stripped from me 4 years ago, as if she still had the rights to it. I saw the wonderful news about your promotion. I always knew you had that Fairbanks drive in you, even if you took the long road to find it. We should meet for lunch at the Westbrook Country Club soon. I'd love to hear about your accomplishments so I can update our friends. Mother's Day is coming up, and it would mean so much to have the whole family together again. Let's put the past behind us where it belongs. After all, family is what defines us. No apology, no acknowledgement of the cold digital execution 4 years ago. Just a tactical invitation to return to the fold now that I had a title that could be traded for social currency at a garden party. I didn't respond. I didn't even hit reply to tell her no. I let the silence be my answer. 2 weeks later, my phone rang from an unknown 703 area code. Against my better judgment, I answered. Indy, it's Sloan. Her voice was honeyed, professional, the exact tone she used to convince wealthy women that their insecurities could be solved with a scalpel and a few injections. I know it's been a while, but I wanted to reach out personally. Mom hasn't been feeling well lately, just the stress of the spring season and her heart. She's been asking about you constantly, staring at your old photos. She really wants to see you, honey. What's wrong with her, Sloan? Just heart stuff. Stress-induced palpitations. You know how fragile she gets when the family isn't whole. She misses you, Indy. We all do. We're all so incredibly proud of our little superintendent. It's time to come home. I called Riley that night to verify the health crisis. Riley snorted so loud it distorted the phone's speaker. Indy, she was at the Boar's Head Resort Spa in Charlottesville yesterday. Aunt Patricia sent me a photo. She was in a white robe, holding a mimosa, looking like she'd never had a stress-induced palpitation in her life. She's as healthy as a thoroughbred. A long beat of silence followed as the truth settled into my bones like ice. Indy, They're not reaching out because they miss you. They're reaching out because you're a power player now. You're no longer a lowly teacher that they have to hide. You're a strategic asset. I already knew. But hearing Riley confirm it made the reality of their narcissism feel final. They didn't want their daughter back. They wanted to claim the dividends of a success they had tried to stifle. Can I ask you something? Have you ever received one of those reconciliation calls? The kind where you can practically hear the clinking of hidden motives through the receiver? If you know exactly what I'm talking about, comment yes below. And if you want to know what I did next, keep watching. Because what happened at that statewide award ceremony was the ultimate Fairbanks ambush. I wish I could tell you I was strong every single day, that I never wavered, never questioned if I was being the difficult one, but that wouldn't be the truth. In the quiet, lonely hours of the night, the old Fairbanks programming would whisper, "She's still your mother. Is a job title worth a lifetime of estrangement?" At work, the pressure was mounting. Everyone wanted to shake the hand of the new superintendent. And then came the questions that felt like thorns. "Your parents must be over the moon," my assistant principal, a kind man who'd been in the district for 30 years, said one morning. "I bet your mom is walking on air, telling everyone at the club that she raised a state leader." I just smiled, nodded, and steered the conversation back to the upcoming school budget. That night, I sat at the kitchen table while Caleb washed the dinner dishes. The clinking of ceramic and the smell of lemon soap usually a comfort, but tonight it felt like a countdown. Maeve was focused on her math homework at the island, her curls falling over her face. The silence felt heavier than a Virginia summer. "You're somewhere else, Indy," Caleb said without turning around. "Talk to me." I pressed my palms against my eyes, feeling the exhaustion of 1,000 battles. Sloane called again. She mentioned Mom's heart, that she's asking for me. What if I'm being the cruel one, Caleb? What if I'm the one being unforgiving and cold? Caleb dried his hands on a kitchen towel, walked over, and sat across from me. Unforgiving for what, Indy? For not letting them rewrite a history where they discarded you? For not playing along with a lie? I don't know. My voice cracked, raw and small. Supposed to forgive family. That's the script, isn't it? The grand reunion at the end of the movie. Caleb didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to our small home office, disappeared for a moment, and returned with his laptop. "I want to show you something," he said softly. "Something I've been keeping for a moment exactly like this, when the gaslighting starts to work." He set the laptop on the table and opened a folder protected by a password, labeled Indy, the Truth. Inside were files I'd almost forgotten I'd sent him years ago. The first was a high-resolution screenshot of that WhatsApp message from May 9th, 2020. The digital ink hadn't faded. The cruelty was still as sharp as a razor. I no longer see her as my daughter. The second was Eleanor's manipulative email from 2 weeks ago, the one that mentioned my drive but ignored her own betrayal. "I saved everything," Caleb said, his voice steady and grounding. "Every message Riley forwarded, every photo Sloane posted that showed you were literally cropped out of the family history. I backed it all up with timestamps because I knew they would try to come back when you were successful enough for them. I knew they would try to make you feel like the crazy one." I stared at the screen, at the cold evidence of my own erasure. "You didn't fail them, Indy," Caleb continued, taking my hand in his his skin rough from the farm but his touch incredibly gentle. You survived them. You built a life out of the scraps they left you. You became a leader, a mother, and a wife without a single word of support from that house in Richmond. You don't owe forgiveness to people who are only sorry they missed out on the photo op. I closed the laptop slowly, the mechanical click sounding like a period at the end of a sentence. Riley sent you another screenshot today, didn't she? Caleb hesitated, then sighed. Are you sure you're ready? I nodded, my resolve hardening into something like steel. He pulled up one more image, a new thread from the Fairbanks family group chat, dated just yesterday. And when I read it, the last shred of my hesitation vanished. Eleanor had written, "The governor will be at the ceremony. Sloan, wear your red Valentino. It pops on camera. Preston, bring the firm's photographer. This isn't just about Indy. This is about reclaiming the Fairbanks name in the state capitol. We walk in together. We look like the perfect family. She won't dare cause a scene with the cameras rolling." The Fairbanks weren't coming for a daughter. They were coming for a hostile takeover of my hardest-won moment. The Virginia state capitol had never looked more imposing, its pristine white neoclassical columns standing like silent, judgmental sentinels against a March sky the color of a bruised plum. Standing at the massive bronze entrance in my navy blue silk dress, a shade I'd chosen because it felt like armor, I felt the weight of a decade pressing against my ribs. Caleb was on my arm, his suit tailored but his hands still bearing the faint, honorable calluses of the farm. And Maeve was clutching my hand, her eyes wide as she took in the rotunda. I felt like I was walking into the epicenter of my own history. The ceremony was being held in the House chamber, a room steeped in the kind of American tradition that my mother usually worshipped from afar. But today, I was the one with the invitation. 500 chairs were arranged in precise military rows, each one filled with educators from every corner of the Commonwealth. Principals from the coastal regions, teachers from the Appalachian coal towns, and school board members from the affluent Northern Virginia suburbs. 3 news crews, including a live satellite feed for the Department of Education's website, were positioned like snipers along the gallery. I signed in at the registration table, the scratch of the expensive pen against the vellum paper sounding like a final checkmate. A volunteer handed me my badge. Indy Fairbanks Webb, 2024 Virginia State Teacher of the Year. "Congratulations," she said with a warm, genuine smile. "Your family must be so incredibly proud to see you here." I smiled back, a polite, hollow expression that didn't quite reach my eyes. "They are," I said, referring to the man and the little girl standing beside me, the only family who knew the cost of the badge pinned to my chest. We took our seats in the very front row, reserved for the honorees and their immediate families. Maeve sat between Caleb and me, her legs swinging beneath her chair, her scuffed Mary Janes a stark contrast to the polished marble floor. "Mom," she whispered, tugging my sleeve with a frantic energy. "Is that your name up there? It's so big." I looked up. A massive banner stretched across the stage. "Virginia State Teacher of the Year, 2024, Indy Fairbanks Webb." My name was 50 feet wide, impossible to ignore. A giant blue and gold rebuke to everyone who had ever called me lowly. Behind me, I could feel the prickling sensation of being watched, that intuitive heat that rises on the back of your neck when you're being stalked by someone who knows your weaknesses. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I already knew who was sitting in the second row, uninvited and undeterred, waiting to hijack a spotlight they hadn't earned. I heard them before I saw them. "Excuse me, but that's my daughter up there. Yes, the guest of honor. I believe there's been a mistake. I need to be in the family section." My mother's voice carried across the chamber with that practiced high society authority she used to command waiters and silence dissent at Westbrook dinner parties. It was the tone of a woman who believed the world was a stage and she was the permanent lead. I kept my eyes fixed forward, my knuckles white as I gripped the armrest. Breathe. Just breathe. From my peripheral vision, I watched the Fairbanks delegation arrive like a royal court in exile. My mother was draped in cream-colored Chanel, a double strand of saltwater pearls at her throat that probably cost more than my first-year salary. Sloane followed in that red Valentino dress she'd bragged about, a garment designed to be photographed, with a neckline that screamed for attention. Preston was right behind them in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, his face set in that mask of legal detachment, with his wife Carolyn trailing behind him, clutching an Oscar de la Renta clutch like a weapon. They swept into the second row, directly behind us, creating a vacuum of expensive perfume and entitlement. And then I heard my mother's stage whisper to the woman sitting beside her, a total stranger who looked caught in the crossfire of Eleanor's ego. "I'm Eleanor Fairbanks, Indy's mother. I raised that girl from the day she was born to be exactly who she is today. Everything she's achieved, she owes to the foundation I built." The woman nodded politely, glancing at the banner and then back at my mother's calculatedly proud expression. Sloane leaned forward, the scent of her Baccarat Rouge perfume hitting me like a physical blow. "Indy," she whispered, her voice a forced, sugary trill. "You look well. That dress is a nice effort." I didn't turn around. I didn't acknowledge her. Then a hand, cold and dry, touched my shoulder. "Aren't you going to say hello to your brother, Ingrid?" Preston's voice was casual, carrying that note of unearned intimacy. I turned my head just slightly, not enough to give them the satisfaction of a full face-to-face, but just enough to be heard. "My family is sitting right next to me," I said, my voice as level as a horizon line. Then I turned back to the stage, squeezing Maeve's small, warm hand in mine, anchoring myself to the presence. "Want to know what happened when the music stopped and the lights dimmed? Want to know the exact moment the mask began to slip from Eleanor Fairbanks's face? If you're still with me, tap that like button and stay right here, because the next 3 minutes were the reason I spent 4 years in silence." Dr. Eleanor Hart walked to the podium with the same quiet, undeniable authority she'd carried into every school board meeting for the last 30 years. She adjusted the microphone, surveyed the silent room, and began. "In 15 years of working within the Virginia education system, I've had the privilege of meeting thousands of extraordinary educators. But today, I want to tell you about one who stands entirely apart." I felt my mother shift in her seat behind me, the silk of her Chanel suit rustling. I could practically hear her preparing her proud mother face for the cameras, her hand going to her pearls, waiting for the moment the spotlight would inevitably swing her way. Indy Fairbanks Webb started her career in a rural elementary school with 23 students, limited resources, and an unlimited supply of determination. Dr. Hart's voice was steady and warm. In her first year alone, she raised literacy levels by an average of 2 grade levels, not through magic, but through the grueling work of showing up every single day. She paused, letting the silence fill the house chamber. Indy didn't come from a background that made her path easy. She didn't have the luxury of connections or the safety net of inherited privilege. She chose a path that many in her circle deemed lesser, and she walked it with her head held high. A slight emphasis on those words. I caught a glimpse of Eleanor's face in the monitor. Her smile had frozen into something brittle and sharp. She built everything herself, Dr. Hart continued. Her master's degree while teaching full-time, her mentorship program that is now the blueprint for 37 counties, and her family. My breath caught. The family I have the distinct honor of introducing now. Her husband, Caleb Webb, a man of the land who has served this community for 6 years, and her daughter, Maeve, who told me backstage that her mom is the best teacher in the whole wide world. The massive television monitors panned to Caleb and Maeve, not to my mother in her Chanel, not to Sloane in her red Valentino. The camera stayed on the man in the off-the-rack suit and the little girl with the daisy dress, to the family that actually mattered. Behind me, I heard a sharp, hissed intake of breath, the sound of Eleanor Fairbanks realizing the narrative was being stolen from her. The creak of a chair followed as someone gripped the armrest too tight. Dr. Hart smiled. Please welcome your 2024 Virginia State Teacher of the Year, Indy Fairbanks Webb. I walked to the podium on legs that felt steadier than I ever thought possible. 500 faces looked up at me. The cameras recorded every breath, every blink. And in that second row, 4 people in designer clothes waited for the public acknowledgement they believed was their birthright. Thank you, Dr. Hart, I began, my voice projected through the house chamber, amplified for the thousands watching online. And thank you to the governor's office and everyone who made today possible. I looked out at the audience, the real audience, the teachers who spent their Sundays grading by lamplight, the principals who stayed late to talk a student out of giving up. When I started teaching 15 years ago, I didn't know if I'd last a semester. The hours were long, the pay was modest, and some people... I paused, choosing my words with the precision of a surgeon. Some people questioned whether this was a path worth taking. They saw my choice as a failure of ambition. Silence fell over the room, the kind of silence that vibrates with unspoken truths. But here's what I've learned. Teaching isn't about proving your status to a room full of people who only value titles. It's about showing up for the kids who need you, even when the people who were supposed to love you the most tell you that you're not enough. I took a breath that felt like freedom. Which brings me to my thank yous. To my husband, Caleb, who believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. To my daughter, Maeve, who reminds me every day what unconditional love looks like. That is my family. That is my foundation, and that is why I am standing here today. I stopped. That was the list. I had closed the book. Behind me, the silence was broken by the sound of someone standing up too quickly. A chair scraped harshly against the marble. "Indy!" My mother's voice rang through the chamber, not a whisper this time, but a command, raw and wounded, designed to force a confrontation in front of the governor himself. The ambush had begun. "Indy! Sweetheart, surely you didn't forget your own mother?" Eleanor's voice didn't just ring. It sliced through the atmosphere of the house chamber like a silver blade through silk. It carried that carefully curated mix of wounded maternal vulnerability and inherited Richmond authority that had governed the borders of my life for 3 decades. It was the voice of a woman who viewed the world as a stage where she was the permanent lead, and right now, she was reclaiming her spotlight. I heard the rhythmic, sharp clicking of her designer heels, a predatory staccato sound, against the historic white marble floor as she began her calculated march toward the stage. Her cream-colored Chanel suit, shimmering with a subtle, expensive sheen under the high-intensity gallery lights, made her look like a ghost of the aristocracy. 500 heads turned in a slow-motion wave of curiosity, a collective pivot of attention that felt like a physical pressure. The television cameras, mounted on their silent hydraulic arms, swiveled with predatory grace, sensing the kind of viral, raw domestic drama that fuels 1,000 news cycles. The moment stretched, expanding until the air in the chamber felt too thin to breathe. My mother reached the bottom of the stage steps, her face a masterpiece of wronged parent theater. Her practice smile was firmly in place, but her eyes, those cold, calculating Fairbanks eyes, were scanning the room to ensure the governor and the cameras were witnessing her grace in the face of my supposed neglect. I stood behind the mahogany podium, the heavy seal of the Commonwealth of Virginia cold beneath my palms, and I felt a strange, crystalline calm wash over me. The ancient Pavlovian fear that used to tighten my throat whenever she entered a room had simply vanished, replaced by the sheer, unshakable weight of the truth I carried in my pocket like a concealed weapon. "Mrs. Fairbanks," I said, my voice projected through the high-fidelity audio system, vibrating off the neoclassical columns and the gold leaf detailing of the ceiling. It was steady, devoid of the tremors that had defined my youth, and carried the resonance of a woman who had finally found her own frequency. She stopped mid-sentence, one foot hovering over the first oak step of the dais. "Thank you for attending," I continued, meeting her gaze with a level of eye contact I had never dared before. Up close, I could see the hairline cracks in her foundation. Not just the makeup, but the entire facade of her life. I saw the way her pupils darted to the live feed monitor, checking her silhouette even as she played the part of the grieving mother. "But the family portion of my speech has concluded. We are here to honor educators, not to perform for social standing." "Indy, don't be ridiculous. I'm your mother. I am the reason you are standing on this stage." "You stated that you no longer saw me as your daughter, Eleanor," I replied, the words falling into the sudden vacuum-like silence of the room, like lead weights into a glass tank. 4 years ago, on the eve of Mother's Day, you sent a message to the entire family group. You said, I chose to be a lowly teacher and that I was no longer one of your children. You didn't just exclude me. You executed my place in this family with the stroke of a thumb because my career didn't fit the Fairbanks brand of success. A collective, sharp intake of breath rippled through the audience, a sound like a sudden wind through dry leaves. These were 500 educators who had all, at some point in their careers, been looked down upon by people in cream Chanel suits. They had all been told their work was noble, but lesser. Someone in the press gallery dropped a tablet, the clatter sounding like a gavel bringing the Fairbanks era to an end. "I have simply honored your decision, Mrs. Fairbanks," I said, my voice hardening into a blade of pure logic. "The family I thank today, the family sitting in the front row, is the one that stood by me when I was just a teacher with a 4.1 GPA and a 12-year-old Honda Civic. They didn't need me to have a state title or a six-figure salary to grant me a seat at their table. They loved the teacher. You only want the superintendent." A security guard, a tall man who looked like he had seen enough domestic disputes to recognize a predator when he saw one, stepped into my peripheral vision. He approached Eleanor with a gentle but unmistakable firmness, gesturing back toward the second row. My mother stood frozen on the steps, a statue of expensive vanity caught in a trap of her own making. She couldn't scream without destroying her dignity, and she couldn't stay without admitting her defeat. For the first time in her meticulously planned life, she was out of moves. The silence lasted for 4 long beats. Then, from the middle of the room, a gray-haired kindergarten teacher in a simple faded cardigan stood up and began to clap. A slow, rhythmic, and defiant sound. Then another joined. Then a principal from Norfolk. Within seconds, the entire House chamber was on its feet, a thunderous roar of validation that wasn't just for me, but for the dignity of every classroom in Virginia. It was a sound that drowned out the Fairbanks name, turning it into background noise. I watched from the podium as the security guard guided Eleanor Fairbanks back to her seat. She walked stiffly, mechanically, her perfect posture finally beginning to sag under the weight of 500 pairs of judgmental eyes. Sloane was furiously tapping at her phone, her face flushed the same garish red as her Valentino dress, likely trying to scrub her digital footprint before the live stream ended. Preston had his arms crossed, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the pulse in his temple from 20 feet away. They had come to hijack my victory, but they were leaving with the realization that their old money influence stopped at the edge of my self-respect. They cornered me in the grand hallway after the governor's reception, under the looming shadows of the statues of Virginia's founders. I had just finished a series of photos with Dr. Eleanor Hart when I saw them approaching like a tactical unit. Eleanor, Sloane, and Preston, moving through the crowd with the frantic energy of people who knew their reputation was leaking water. "Indy," my mother hissed, her voice a low, vibrating tremor of fury. "You humiliated me in front of the entire Commonwealth. You aired our private business on a televised feed." "I stated a fact in a public forum, Eleanor. I didn't create the business. I just stopped keeping the secret." I reached into my clutch, pulled out my phone, and held up the high-resolution screenshot of the WhatsApp message, the one that had lived in my digital vault for 4 years. "This is May 9th, 2020. I no longer see her as my daughter. Your words, your timestamp, your decision. I didn't humiliate you. You humiliated yourself 4 years ago. I just finally gave you the audience you always craved." It was a heated moment. You know how I get when I'm stressed. You're taking a single text and destroying a family name over it. "I'm taking a single text and believing you, Eleanor," I countered, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "I believed you when you said I wasn't your daughter. I believed you when you seated me at the kids' table. I believed you when you forgot my graduation to attend a garden party. The only thing that has changed is that I no longer care if you believe in me. Preston stepped forward, trying to employ the DC mediator tone he used to settle multi-million-dollar corporate lawsuits. Indy, let's be pragmatic here. The video is already being clipped on Twitter. People are calling Mom's office. They're looking up Sloane's practice. You're causing real-world damage to the family assets. Is this really the meaning you were looking for? I haven't been a Fairbanks in 2 years, Preston, I said, lifting my hand so the soft gold light of the hallway caught the simple band on my finger. I am a web, and the damage you're talking about is just the sound of people seeing who you really are. You're worried about assets. I'm worried about the 4,000 children in my district who need to know that their worth isn't determined by people like you. You didn't show up for the hard years. You don't get to claim the trophy years. Sloane's composure broke into jagged pieces. This is so typical. We rearranged our entire surgical schedule to be here. We even bought these stupid flowers. She gestured to a bouquet of lilies that looked as wilted as her argument. You brought props for a photo op, Sloane, I said, my voice dropping to a fierce, quiet intensity. I read the chat Riley sent me. Good PR move, Preston said. Wear the red dress, Mom said. You weren't celebrating a sister. You were staging a campaign. But the campaign is over, and the voters have spoken. I turned my back on them, the sound of my own heels, steady, purposeful, marking the distance between my past and my future. Caleb was waiting for me at the end of the hall, his hand finding the small of my back, a warm anchor in the sea of marble and ego. Maeve was leaning against his leg, her yellow daisy dress a bright spot in the gray afternoon. Ready to go home, Mom? She asked, her voice the only one that mattered. More than ready, sweetheart. The fallout was a slow-motion collapse of the Fairbanks social architecture. It didn't happen in a day, but in 1,000 small, cold moments. Riley called me a month later, her voice carrying a mix of awe and a strange, hollow pity. Your mom resigned from the country club social committee, she said. She told everyone she needed to refocus on family, but the whispers were too loud. The Africa lie became a punchline in Richmond. Women who had been her friends for 20 years started forgetting to invite her to brunch. In their world, cruelty is acceptable, but being caught in a low-rent lie is a death sentence. Sloane's Instagram page went dark, and according to Riley, she had to hire a PR firm to handle the influx of negative reviews on her practice page, mostly from teachers and parents who found her heart emoji response to my disowning to be, the Fairbanks were learning that in the digital age, your brand is only as strong as your character. 6 months later, I finally learned what peace actually feels like. It's not a quiet room. Our farmhouse is a symphony of beautiful, messy noise. It's the sound of Maeve's piano lessons, the stumbling, imperfect notes of Fur Elise that she plays with such fierce pride. It's the smell of the damp Virginia earth on Caleb's boots, and the sound of the wind rattling the copper roof during a summer storm. It's the stillness that comes from the absolute certainty that I am no longer auditioning for a role in someone else's play. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in October, almost a year to the day since the ceremony. No return address, but the vellum envelope and the elegant looped cursive were as familiar as my own reflection. I sat under the oak tree, the one where I had married Caleb, and I opened it with hands that didn't shake. "Indy," it began, the ink looking slightly blurred in places. "I have written this letter 47 times. I tried to justify the WhatsApp message as stress, but the truth is simpler and much uglier. I was afraid. I grew up believing that love was something you earned, with a title and a paycheck, and when you chose a different path, I felt like you were rejecting me. I chose my image because it was the only thing I knew how to control. I was wrong. I was cruel. And I am sorry." I read it once, then again. Then I folded it and put it in the kitchen drawer, right next to the spare tractor keys and Maeve's old drawings. I didn't feel a surge of joy, nor a wave of anger. I just felt done. Here is the truth I want you to carry if you are standing in the shadows of a family that doesn't see you. Transactional love isn't love. It's a contract, and you are allowed to tear that contract up. My mother's rejection was never a reflection of my worth. It was a map of her own wounds. You are not responsible for healing the people who discarded you. You can have compassion for their brokenness from a safe, guarded distance. Boundaries aren't walls built of hate. They are the fences that protect the garden you've spent your whole life growing. I am Indy Fairbanks Webb, and I finally know that a lowly life, filled with love, is the highest success there is.